Oh, Egypt is Africa, Jack. You touch that, you touch me.
When I got to Paris, the man said I couldn't come in. Some man, French man. They gave me no explanation other than to say, we have our orders. They wouldn't let me phone the American embassy, and they tried to imply that the American embassy was behind it, which I told them that I didn't know that France was a satellite of the United States. Well, this made them angry because they like to be independent, you know, or pretend to be independent. They were taking their orders from someone as high up in the French Foreign Ministry who did not want me to enter France, and there's a reason for it. I don't blame them. And I told them while I was there that maybe my plane got mixed up, and I was in South Africa, in the wrong country. I told them this couldn't be Paris, it must be Johannesburg, and they got red. And you know how they can get red. There's a large, increasing number of dark-skinned people swelling the dark population of France and Britain, and it's giving them a great deal of cause for worry. No effort has been made to unite the Afro-American community or the American Negro community with the West Indian community, and then those two communities with the African community, and those communities with the Asian community. This has never been done. And this frightened many interests in this country. Many people in this country who want to see us the minority and who don't want to see us taking too militant or too uncompromising a stand are absolutely against the successful regrouping or organizing of any faction in this country whose thought and whose thinking pattern is international rather than national. There's a worldwide revolution going on. It goes beyond Mississippi. It goes beyond Alabama. It goes beyond Harlem. What is it revolting against? The power structure. The American power structure? No. The French power structure? No. The English power structure? No. Then what power structure? An international Western power structure.
We always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people. I'm not the pig. You've got to make a distinction. And the people are going to have to attack the pigs. The people are going to have to stand up against the pigs. That's what the Panthers are doing. That's what the Panthers are doing all over the world.
Let's go ahead and go to Howard in New York. Howard, you're on the air. Go ahead.
First of all, I said I disagree with you and I don't like you. I didn't say you suck or anything like that.
Okay, well, whatever. That's what they said you said.
All right. Second
You're
of all,
on the air now, sir. Go ahead.
Give me 2 minutes to interrupt me, okay? Then you can say anything.
I know. You got to always act like you got the power and you're setting the ground rules. Sir, make your point or I'm going to hang up on you.
Okay. I've read your website a few times and I've listened to a few guests you had on. And I see all these articles you have on your website talking about Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, Ariel Sharon, and the like. And I feel, in my opinion, you're no better than George Galloway, no better than Ray McGovern, no better than Mel Gibson. In my opinion, I think you're an anti-Semite. And I just heard you say that Israel has 400 nuclear weapons. How do you know that? And if they did, they're the only civilized country in the Middle East, surrounded by a bunch of maniacs who want to bomb
hold on.
them.
This is all crazy here. Are you saying I'm lying about Israel having nukes?
Well, how do you know? Prove that.
Well, Mr. Morneau and a bunch of other people have come out, and Israel has admitted in a bunch of declassified documents because the media has only lied in the U.S. and said they didn't have nukes all these years, but now it's admitted. I mean, it's admitted, sir. You're saying I'm lying about that?
Well, I never read an article saying that.
Okay,
And
hold on. You don't want to put you on hold. See, most Americans think if something's your opinion, that makes it so. He said, I'd like to see your article. I'd like to see your proof of that. They've arrested a bunch of their scientists that worked at these labs. They've had nukes since the early 1960s. The United States gave it to them. They've got, of course, former President Jimmy Carter, and then Israel got mad and said he released classified info. They said it was true. A few weeks ago said, hey, you got 200 and something nukes. That's how much he knew when he was in office. It's 400. The real number is more like 800. If you want to get technical, it's 800. But the mainline scholarly amount admitted the last time stuff got leaked in the early 90s was 400. And so I say Israel's got 400 nukes, whether it's 200 or 900, whatever. They got hundreds of nuclear weapons. It's hypocritical to say that Iran's going to get one when the UN and everybody else says, and our own CIA assessment says they don't have nukes. To then say, well, they might get one someday, so we want to nuke them. They've said, hit them with a bunch of strategic nukes, which then, by the way, will add and create isotopes with a ground detonation, much dirtier than an atmospheric, because then the atmosphere, it doesn't create a lot of fallout. The fallout's the combination of the reaction and the surrounding metals and compounds. You know what a little bit of cobalt will do? Just a little bit in the ground where that nuke goes off. I mean, let's say a little bit of cobalt in a machine at that base, and they have, by the way, cobalt and things there. Just hundreds of different metals create incredibly radioactive isotopes, and they want to hit them with hundreds of strategic nukes all over Iran at all their research sites, destroying their entire infrastructure. That will be thrown into the air, and we'll breathe it. Okay. And that's why Israel's lost so much credibility, is calling former presidents and calling anybody that's against attacking Iran an anti-Semite.
Let me explain. If the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, the Jews have always claimed was was forged by the Tsarist secret police.
Yeah, I thought it. Well, I mean, it's written like a comic book. I mean, why would anybody write something down like that?
But it's real. And Henry Ford, who's my hero in the International Jew during the 1920s, I'm sure you're familiar with Mr. Ford, he made the protocols famous, and in the International Jew, he pretty much rehashes what the protocols said, that the Jews control world finance, the media. Now they control the U.S. foreign policy. The Jews, Mr. Jones, have inflicted tremendous harm upon the United States.
Well, let me ask you a question. From your perspective, should the Jews be gotten rid of?
Yes, they should. In every country...
All right, I'm going to stop you right there.
I mean, you ought to go look at all the Nazi sites that attack me because, I don't come out and say Jews are the devil.
To protect against like the agents provocateur and those who are going to try
these people have built in a mechanism of total protection, and it's called transparency. Why the New York City needs to send undercover cops down here when you can hear the General Assembly echoing through from one side of the street to the other. It's transparency. There was a great opposition leader to Hitler named Niemöller, and he'd get up in his pulpit and blast the Nazis Sunday after Sunday, and of course they'd send, same thing here, they look like cops. It's sort of out of a bad Doonesbury cartoon. and they'd send Nazi goons to write down every. And so finally, he actually went to Hitler himself, and he said, you know, you don't have to send people to, because I'll tell you, every single week I'm going to get up and denounce the Nazi Party. And it's transparency. And that is why, you know, the poison of violence. You saw it with the Weather Underground, you saw in the 60s, you saw it with the Black Panther movement, you saw it with the American Indian movement, is that in order to sustain violent opposition, you have to replicate the paranoia and the brutality of the oppressor.
The Occupy movement is the force that will revitalize traditional Christianity in the United States or signal its moral, social, and political irrelevance. The mainstream church, battered by declining numbers and a failure to defiantly condemn the crimes and cruelty of the corporate state, as well as a refusal to vigorously attack the charlatans of the Christian right, whose misuse of the gospel to champion unfettered capitalism, bigotry, and imperialism is heretical, has become a marginal force in the life of most Americans, especially the young. Outside the doors of churches, many of which have trouble filling a quarter of the pews on Sundays, struggles a movement driven largely by young men and women, which has as its official credo the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall possess the earth. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for justice, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons and daughters of God. Blessed are they who suffer persecution for justice' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It was the church in Latin America, especially in Central America and Augusto Pinochet's Chile, which provided the physical space, moral support, and direction for the opposition to dictatorship. It was the church in East Germany that organized the peaceful opposition marches in Leipzig that would bring down the communist regime in that country. It was the church in Czechoslovakia and its 90-year-old cardinal that blessed and defended the Velvet Revolution. It was the church, and especially the African-American church, that made possible the civil rights movement. And it is the church, especially Trinity Church in New York City, with its open park at Canal and 6th Avenue, which can make manifest its commitment to the gospel and nonviolent social change by permitting the occupied movement to use this empty space. Just as churches in other cities that hold unused physical space have a moral imperative to turn them over to the Occupy movements. If this nonviolent movement fails, it will eventually be replaced by one that will employ violence. And if it fails, it will fail in part because good men and women, especially those in the church, did nothing. Where is the church now? Where are the clergy? Why do so many church doors remain shut? Why do so many churches refuse to carry out the central mandate of the Christian gospel and lift up the cross? Someday they are going to have to answer the question, where were you when they crucified my Lord? Let me tell you, on this first Sunday in Advent, when we celebrate hope, when we remember in the church how Mary and Joseph left Nazareth for Bethlehem, why I am in Liberty Square. I am here because I have tried, however imperfectly, to live by the radical message of the gospel. I am here because I know that it is not what we say or profess, but what we do. I am here because I have seen in my many years overseas as a foreign correspondent that great men and women of moral probity arise in all cultures and all religions to fight the oppressor on behalf of the oppressed. I am here because I have seen that it is possible to be a Jew, a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Christian, a Hindu, or an atheist, and carry the cross. The words are different, but the self-sacrifice and thirst for justice are the same. And these men and women who may not profess what I profess or believe what I believe are my brothers and sisters, and I stand with them honoring and respecting our differences and finding hope and strength and love in our common commitment. At times like these, I hear the voices of the saints who went before us. The suffragist Susan B. Anthony, who announced that resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. And the suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who said, "The moment we begin to fear the opinions of others and hesitate to tell the truth that is in us, and from motives of policy are silent when we should speak, the divine floods of light and life no longer flow into our souls." Or Henry David Thoreau, who told us we should be men and women first and subjects afterward, that we should cultivate a respect not for the law, but for what is right. And Frederick Douglass, who warned us, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. And the great 19th century populist Mary Elizabeth Lease, who thundered, "Wall Street owns the country. It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street. The great common people of this country are slaves, and monopoly is the master." And General Smedley Butler, who said that after 33 years and 4 months in the Marine Corps, he had come to understand that he had been nothing more than a gangster for capitalism, making Mexico safe for American oil interests, making Haiti and Cuba safe for banks, and pacifying the Dominican Republic for sugar companies. War, he said, is a racket in which newly dominated countries are exploited by the financial elites and Wall Street, while the citizens foot the bill and sacrifice their young men and women on the battlefield for corporate greed. Or Eugene V. Debs, the socialist presidential candidate who in 1912 pulled almost 1 million votes, or 6%, and who was sent to prison by Woodrow Wilson for opposing the First World War, and who told the world, "While there is a lower class, I am in it. And while there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free." And Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who when he was criticized for walking with Martin Luther King on the Sabbath in Selma answered, "I pray with my feet." And who quoted Samuel Johnson, who said the opposite of good is not evil. The opposite of good is indifference. And Rosa Parks, who defied the segregated bus system and said, "The only tired I was tired of giving in." And Philip Berrigan, who said if enough Christians follow the gospel, they can bring any state to its knees. And the poet Langston Hughes, who wrote, "What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotted meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?" And Martin Luther King, who said on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? And there comes a time when a true follower of Jesus Christ must take a stand that's neither safe nor politic nor popular, but he must take a stand because it is right. Where were you when they crucified my Lord? Were you there to halt the genocide of Native Americans? Were you there when Sitting Bull died on the cross? Were you there to halt the enslavement of African Americans? Were you there to halt the mobs that terrorized black men and women and even children with lynching during Jim Crow? Were you there when they persecuted union organizers and Joe Hill died on the cross? Were you there to halt the incarceration of Japanese Americans in World War II? Were you there to halt Bull Connor's dogs as they were unleashed on civil rights marchers in Birmingham? Were you there when Martin Luther King died upon the cross? Were you there when Malcolm X died upon the cross? Were you there to halt the hate crimes, discrimination, and violence against gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and those who are transgender? Were you there when Matthew Shepard died on the cross? Were you there to halt the abuse and at times enslavement of workers in the farmlands in this country? Were you there to halt the murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent Vietnamese during the war in Vietnam and hundreds of thousands of Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan? Were you there to halt Israel's saturation bombing of Lebanon and Gaza? Were you there when Rachel Corrie died on the cross? Were you there to halt the corporate forces that have left working men and women and the poor in this country bereft of sustainable income, hope, and dignity? Were you there to share your food with your neighbor in Liberty Square? Were you there to become homeless with them? Where were you when they crucified my Lord? I know where I was, here with you.
And don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power. And I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God.
Last night, RT made international headlines when one of our anchors went on the record and said Russian intervention in Crimea is wrong. And indeed, as a reporter on this network, I face many ethical and moral challenges, especially me personally, coming from a family whose my grandparents came here as refugees during the Hungarian Revolution, ironically to escape the Soviet forces. I have family on the opposite side, on my mother's side, that sees the daily grind of poverty. And I'm very lucky to have grown up here in the United States. I'm the daughter of a veteran. My partner is a physician at a military base where he sees every day the first-hand accounts of the ultimate prices that people pay for this country. And that is why, personally, I cannot be part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin. I'm proud to be an American and believe in disseminating the truth, and that is why, after this newscast, I'm resigning. And that is why, personally, I cannot be part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin. I'm proud to be an American and believe in disseminating the truth. And that is why, after this newscast, I'm resigning.
2 weeks ago, I decided to go against the editorial line of my network by using this platform to call out Russia's military action in Crimea. When I woke up the next morning, I was praised as an anti-Russian hero in the mainstream media only because my statement fit into the Cold War resurrection happening across the political establishment. But what happened next was fascinating because I witnessed my message get distorted by a group of neocon warmongers here in D.C. James Kirchick has been on RT before to troll the network and was subsequently brought on MSNBC to tell the world I was a lunatic a day after I made my on-air statement. The very next day, my former colleague Liz Wall resigned live on air, ostensibly unrelated to my statement, only then to celebrate a media blitz and freedom selfie with none other than James Kirchick, who had also published the first exclusive Why I Quit expose on her resignation just an hour after she left the studio. Fast forward to yesterday, where Truthdig published an investigative piece by journalists Max Blumenthal and Rania Kalik, revealing how my former colleague's resignation may have been pre-coordinated. See, 19 minutes before Wall resigned, the neocon think tank Foreign Policy Initiative took to Twitter to announce word on the street says that something big might happen on RT in about 20 to 25 minutes. Then, 10 minutes before the resignation, they tweeted again, "You're really going to want to tune in to RT." So how is it possible that the think tank knew in advance that my former colleague was about to resign? Well, one only has to look at who was a part of this think tank to understand the story more clearly. See, Foreign Policy Initiative, or FPI, is a think tank that grew directly out of the Project for a New American Century, or PNAC. PNAC consisted of some of the worst Bush administration officials that seized on 9/11 to push the U.S. invasion of Iraq. But after PNAC had become synonymous with propaganda and foreign policy blunders, FPI took its place and has since pushed for such failed policies as the Afghanistan troop surge and military intervention in Syria. According to FPI's official mission statement, the U.S. and its allies face many foreign policy challenges. They come from rising and resurgent powers, including China and Russia. Wow, 2 sentences in and they're already fear-mongering about Russia. And guess who's a senior fellow at FPI? James Kirchick, one half of the famous Freedom Selfie. And there's only 4 people who sit on its board. First, there's Dan Sr., a man who was the spokesperson for Paul Bremer, governor of Iraq, following Saddam's ousting. Sr. was also Mitt Romney's foreign policy advisor. Then there's Eric Edelman, former Undersecretary of Defense for George W. Bush, who's tried to describe the discussion of changing course in Iraq as, quote, traitor talk. Then Robert Kagan, co-founder of PNAC. And last but not least, William Kristol, widely regarded as one of the fathers of neoconservative ideology. Looking a little bit more into this organization, I was surprised how many times I had been mentioned on their website. These guys have been following my story pretty closely, trying to spin it as negatively as they can. Even posting one Facebook status update by none other than Kirchick himself, who writes, "Think of Martin as the puppet opposition in a dictatorship. Like Moscow's citing its right to protect Russian minorities in Ukraine as a pretext for its occupation of Crimea, Martin's act of pseudo-dissidence is a good old-fashioned false flag." Whoa, okay, let me get this straight. Kirchick's concocting a paranoid conspiracy theory about my being a Russian secret agent, yet I'm the crazy conspiracy theorist here? Interesting. And as you can see, he's nothing short of obsessed with Russia and RT specifically. He also really loves to repeat the word state propaganda and Cold War over and over and over again, while never mentioning the fact that he himself was a state propagandist. That's right, he worked for Radio Free Europe, which is one of the biggest state-funded networks in the world, which used to be funded by the CIA and is now funded directly with U.S. tax dollars to spread pro-American views. As one of the only media spokespeople for FPI, James Kirchick's role is to promote neoconservative ideology, to promote U.S. militarism, like advocating putting NATO troops on the ground around Russia to show Russia we mean business, to promote Israeli occupation, and to promote the execution of whistleblower Chelsea Manning. And even though he's a seemingly independent journalist writing for the Daily Beast, etc., his real puppeteer is William Kristol. And if there's one thing we know about Bill Kristol, is that he really loves war. According to Truthdig, Kristol's Weekly Standard outlined FPI's goals earlier this month, insisting that current geopolitical crises could be exploited to reverse America's war-weary post-Iraq attitude and prevent further cuts to defense spending. Yeah, we can't have that. All that's needed, he says, is the rallying. And the turnaround could be fast. And what better way to rally than to have your neocon minions parade around the mainstream media, helping to resurrect the Cold War with RT as its central target. Look, I'm not alleging any conspiracy here, but clearly there are ideological motivations and well-connected forces of neoconservatism driving these obsessive attacks on me and this network. Listen, criticisms of Russia's actions are valid, but the Foreign Policy Initiative and the stooges that do its bidding represent corrupt and dark forces that don't care about a free media, diplomacy, peace, and certainly not human rights. These people care about one thing: U.S. imperialism and exerting their power and global dominance, truth be damned. As we know in D.C., the truth is never as it seems, and the House of Cards is just that, a flimsy stack of lies that can't be held up for too long.
Abby Martin is joining us today from D.C. She's going to update us on this neocon drive to war in Crimea. Abby, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sean.
You stirred quite a bit of drama over there at RT when you criticized, or let's say you objected to the idea of Russia invading the Ukraine as a principle of being anti-war. And then right after you did that, Liz Wall, your fellow anchor over there at RT, picked up and said, well, I'm going to follow in her footsteps and actually resign from RT publicly here on TV. And she gave her reasons for it. And to a lot of us, it seemed like a lot of horseshit, because the way that she stated it, frankly, was scripted. She was reading from a script, and it was overdramatic. So I want to hear what your take on it was at the time, and now what we know is really perhaps a neocon operation.
Yeah, so I mean, I watched the situation unfold the weekend prior to me speaking out, and I just said, look, I knew there'd come a day working for RT, which is funded by public grants in Russia in the exact same way that the BBC from the British Empire and Al Jazeera from Qatar is funded, and I knew that there would come a day where I would have to object staunchly to the policies of the person employing me, which is public grants in Russia, and that day came on Monday 2 weeks ago. And I watched the situation unfold. I felt very strongly morally opposed to any sort of military aggression, and I saw that happening in Crimea, Russian troops moving in. I understand that there's a treaty to allow a certain amount of troops there. However, I don't understand why there was so much military movement right on the heels of this interim government. So if that treaty was binding before, I felt like it was it wasn't appropriate to impose all this military force right after this coup happens. So I told my boss on Monday, I said, look, I feel so strongly about this. And I knew that there was a great chance that I would be fired. I was walking into work that day thinking I probably won't have a job at the end of the day. And I was willing to take that risk because I have such a strong moral compass, and I speak out against military aggression on a daily basis with the U.S. empire. Right. And I told my boss, and he was very understanding. I just said, look, I'm not going to be able to put on a show unless I'm able to say something. And he just said, look, I can't stop you from saying what you want to say. I'd rather have you say what you want to say and still have a show to put out. So I decided to go and write something from my heart and say something from my heart. After that happened, it was really kind of a whirlwind, seeing how all of these people picked it up, thousands and thousands on the press wire, picking up the story just because it fit the fervor of the Cold War resurrection going on in the establishment press. It was quite fascinating to be in the middle, to make myself the story of this corporate media spin machine just because it promoted this anti-Russian fervor. Mm-hmm. So that was really fascinating. And then, of course, it proceeded to be spun out of control, calling me a lunatic, a conspiracy theorist, because once they realized that my politics were too paradigm crushing to fit into that neat mold of this anti-Russian journalist hero, then they proceeded to smear me and defame me. Very fascinating. And then the following day, and so that night, Lawrence O'Donnell's show had on this guy named Jamie Kirchick, who works for the Foreign Policy Institute. He's a fellow. Foreign Policy Institute is a PNAC 2.0. It's a neoconservative think tank right in the heart of D.C. Their mission statement on their website is essentially saying we need to invoke war with Russia and China. The Middle East has failed. Of course, the neocons have failed abysmally in their rhetoric in terms of the Middle East and engaging in the neo-imperialism that's happened in that region. So they need to shift over to the next two global superpowers. This is all very laid out in their mission statement. This isn't just, some random excerpt on a giant essay. This is their mission statement in the FPI, which is what this think tank is called. Jamie Kirchick is a fellow of the think tank. Jamie Kirchick's the same guy who went on and trolled RT in the past for their anti-gay law, got worldwide press for it, lauded as some hero willing to stand up to the propaganda network funded by Putin. Right. So I found it quite odd that, first of all, this person's a relevant journalist when he's just like basically a professional troll. Secondly, why would this person be asked to go on Lawrence O'Donnell and speak on behalf of RT when all he's done is literally just trolled RT? So he went on there called me a lunatic, just totally made up all this bullshit about me. And I was like, wow, that's really crazy. And then the next day, Liz Wall resigned on air, and I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. I didn't know that she had felt this way. She'd never really voiced anything to me, at least editorially in the network. And then what happened next was extremely bizarre. So up until that point, I just thought, wow, this is kind of this spin machine going out of control. Now Liz is resigning. Holy shit. Then I saw about an hour later this exclusive interview published with none other than Jamie Kirchick, the same guy who had gone on Lawrence O'Donnell the night before, called me a lunatic, had exclusively published Liz Wall's reason why I quit RT. Of course, starting off throwing me under the bus and then proceeding to go into how she just couldn't stand working for a Putin-funded Putin propaganda network, but citing all these reasons of kind of American exceptionalism and wanting to be pro-American. I thought it was very strange. However, I didn't really tie all this together until later on when I saw that she had proceeded to line up this giant media tour immediately following her resignation. I mean, I was going on Piers Morgan that night, and I got a call from the producer, and she was like, "You're going to go on with Liz Wall." And I was like, how is this happening so quickly? I mean, because for me, when it happened to me, I mean, you're flooded with thousands of interview requests from all over the world. It takes a little while to go through them. I mean,
schedule it, right?
It took me about a day to figure out, like, get my bearings and think, okay, what do I want to do? How do I want to portray myself? Instead of just immediately flooding into every network that would take me and kind of telling this story. So I thought that was really strange. And then I saw her tweeting with Jamie Kirchick, freedom selfie, her and this guy who had publicly defamed me and written all these hit pieces about me. It was very, very strange. And basically it all came out today. This giant expose in Truthdig, which is Chris Hedges' a website that Chris Hedges and Amy Goodman post on regularly, by Rania Kalik and Max Blumenthal, excellent journalists in DC, who have kind of just all lined this up and basically exposed that this was a staged operation. I mean, the evidence points to that, because the Foreign Policy Institute, an hour before Liz even resigned, had tweeted, "Something big is about to happen, everyone tune in live to RT." And they proceeded to continue tweeting, "Everyone tune in, something big is going to happen." And so you have to ask, how did they know?
Must have told them, because obviously, as I said, she had written the script, and that's what she was reading from when she gave this announcement. So she must have alerted at least people around this organization, if not specifically them.
And Jamie Kirchick even admitted in that exclusive editorial of why I quit RT, he admitted that 6 months prior, she had reached out to him and said that she really admired what he did to troll RT about the gay law. I mean, clearly they'd been working together for that 6-month period and just kind of saw the publicity that I got for speaking out and decided to pull the trigger. Very interesting. And it was especially interesting seeing the rhetoric almost mimicked what Jamie Kirchick and this Foreign Policy Institute's rhetoric is. Putin, kind of asserting the word Putin, propaganda network, and then just the Cold War. You just hear the same kind of rhetoric being lauded by both parties here, and it just seems very strange how this kind of all matched up. Really unfortunate situation, because Liz was a dear friend of mine, and unfortunately she took online today in kind of a desperate measure and started calling me anti-Semitic and all this stuff. I mean, all of it just kind of shows.
And now you see how this operation works. They come out with these kind of terms, anti-Semitic. It's like, where does that come from? I mean, but again, it's like racist. I mean, how do you argue it, right? And it's something that's so scathing that people immediately have to react to. So you're seeing, obviously, that you are a pivotal character in this overall attack on Russia, because Russia Today, RT, is actually one of the best networks out there that's doing good journalism, that's criticizing the American empire. And in a moment now that that the Americans are looking to sanction the Russians, I'm wondering, are they going to sanction RT too?
It is a scary thought, Sean, and now that the U.S. is immediately, it's so funny. It's like someone can throw a stone in another country, and if it's a country that's non-puppeted by U.S. hegemony, they're like, all right, step down, regime change. Like, it's just incredible the moral imposition that this country and government has on the rest of the world. And when I said on last Monday or 2 Mondays ago, when I said, look, I don't have as much knowledge as I admittedly should, I'm not saying that I don't know shit about Ukraine. Of course I do. I'm just saying I don't have the hubris to say this is what needs to happen and why militarily. I don't think any of us do, unless you are Ukrainian, unless you are Russian. And I know a lot of Russians disagree with my stance, but at least they respected that I'm morally consistent. And at least I can say that about myself, is that I'm morally consistent no matter what superpower we're talking about. There's multiple empires in the world, US and Russia, and I'm not pro one and anti the other. I'm just morally consistent.
Right. Well, where do you see things going at the moment as far as, obviously working with at RT, you must have a certain insight into the Russian reaction to this, really, I mean, I would call it aggression from the NATO powers, the West, in the first place. Because remember that there was a revolution that was taking place against a democratically elected government when that government went against the EU system, right, the European expansion. And as we know, the Ukraine, sits on gas line, pipeline, projected territory where you could build pipelines for natural gas. And obviously the West wants access to it and to control that. So as they're going towards there's a definite agenda here to create a war, and Russia in this case now becomes the villain. Where do you see this situation? How tense are things at the moment?
Things are very tense, Sean. I mean, this is no joke. We're talking about people who worked under Paul Bremer, the sitting governor of Iraq after Saddam Hussein. We're talking about Bill Kristol, probably one of the masters of the founders of neoconservatism. I mean, these people are not fucking around. And they're kind of coordinating this whole propaganda campaign to demonize Russia, to demonize RT. Clearly shows what a threat the network is, as you just mentioned. But in terms of these world powers, I mean, you just have to look at how the mainstream media picked up on these protesting RT anchors and use it to laud their narrative. And you just have to look at their coverage for the last 3 weeks. It's absurd. I mean, it's almost like they are goading Obama into striking militarily. I just can't believe that we're living in a time where you have media entirely funded by corporations provoking the U.S. government to strike at Putin. I mean, did we forget the lessons of the Cold War here? Mutual assured destruction. We don't want to fuck with countries that have nuclear weapons. Like, it's time to approach this diplomatically and peacefully. And, I just really hope that we can de-escalate the military occupation of Crimea. I know that Crimea just voted the referendum. I don't think the referendum was entirely fair. I know that Russia also moved past Crimea and seized this gas area in another village neighboring Crimea. So of course this is about natural gas. It always has been about resources, and all they do is just dumb down the rhetoric and make it about good and evil, just like they did in the Cold War, and it all fell apart. And I just hope people are smart enough to not buy into the same rhetoric that we heard 50 years ago, Sean. Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the reaction been like on the Russian side? I mean, obviously there's there's been kind of been a ho-hum attitude as far as the sanctions, but I think that we've talked about in this show, at least, the Russians are, they're not going to kid around. If they feel aggressed, if they feel in any way threatened in terms of their border, they can escalate, and we don't know how quickly that can escalate to nuclear.
Yeah, it is very scary. I can't speak for obviously like the Russian government. I mean, I don't really have that much contacts with Moscow, but I will tell you the reporters here at RT that are Russian are very passionate about this. They are very in defense of what Russia's doing, and they're very in defense of the movements in Crimea and Ukraine. And they're very opposed to the coup that happened. That obviously, when you look at what's been going on, the U.S. has done a very good job of manufacturing dissent and kind of fostering instability in countries very covertly. Russia doesn't have that same savvy when it comes to, foreign policy. It's like Russia moves in with their tanks and their guns, and the U.S. can kind of just foster this environment where you have Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State, speaking at the National Press Club last year, I think December 13, where she admitted on camera that the U.S. has invested billions of dollars into pro-democratic institutions in Ukraine over the last 2 decades. I mean, clearly this is a long strategy here.
Right, and pro-democratic means anti-Russian. It doesn't really mean democratic.
Right, of course. It just means having a pro-U.S., pro-EU regime. I mean, that's what it all comes down to, is this extraordinary threat that Russia poses in kind of these post-Soviet states. And I mean, your dad said it best. He was like, this is the reversal of the Iron Curtain. I mean, here we heard all this rhetoric during the Cold War of the Iron Curtain, one state knocking down another, and the Soviet takeover. And really look at what's happened since the Cold War. It's pretty much been the opposite of that, where the U.S. is knocking down all the former Soviet states and continuing to advance all the way up until Russia's borders. I mean, can you imagine for a second if Russian officials were on the streets of Mexico City or, Vancouver, riling people up to overthrow their governments? I mean, of course the U.S. would say, hey, this is getting a little too close to home here.
Well, so the U.S. is so far from home, they don't even know where home is anymore, I think.
It is a scary time, Sean. It is no joke. We're not talking about Venezuela here. We're talking about Russia. And the second that you start talking about economically isolating Russia, and even Rand Paul came out and said, now we have to economically isolate. We need to really respond aggressively. It's like, hold on here.
Well, he sold out when he started supporting Romney, so not expecting much from him anymore. But as far as, again, like talking about the borders, I mean, this is a continuation of the policy. First, it was, let's go to war with Iran. Well, we can't quite get Iran. We're going to blow up Syria a little bit. Syria is not going the way we want it to. We're not overthrowing Assad. And again, these are all on Russia's southern borders, right now next to the Caspian, right? So it's like, let's keep encroaching. So let's try Ukraine. Meanwhile, China and Japan are on the brink of war over these islands. I mean, literally, we are this close to nuclear third World War III, potentially a nuclear war. What is your focus right now as far as breaking this head? I mean, what do you think? What are you trying to do to expose it or stop what you know is a potential escalation?
Well, it's really hard, Sean, because of course I've been called a Putin apologist and a U.S. apologist since all this happened because I'm not towing one line or the other. However, I'm deeply, deeply disturbed by the media's coverage and incitement of this rhetoric and of this violence and this kind of Cold War attitude. And it is disgusting, it is despicable, and I'm trying my best to kind of combat that by just continuing to push the fact that we need to see through the propaganda and really come to our own conclusions here and to continue to push peace and diplomacy, Sean. I just hope that this Crimea referendum, I just hope that we can see it through. I hope the people of Ukraine and Crimea can determine their own future without having these state actors involved. But you're absolutely right. This is no joke. I mean, we're talking about two global superpowers that have a stockpile of nuclear weapons, and neither of them will back down. And it is really, really, really scary. And in terms of breaking the set, I mean, I'm continuing to just break the set on everything that, of course, while the corporate media is obsessed with Russia and demonizing every single thing about the country, I'm continuing to focus on problems here that we can change. And, Fukushima is another one that's ongoing that everyone's kind of forgotten about. The TPP is another giant corporate coup being plotted out. Unbeknownst to the majority of people in this country and probably the world. So I'm continuing to speak out about these issues. But yeah, this is a scary time, Sean, and I just hope that people can see through and really rise up.
Yeah, I mean, this is the moment, exactly. It's the time to wake up and realize, how much this is, we live within a construct. It's a construct that the media plays a tremendous role in creating for us. And I hope that people, like you said, will rise up, will wake up. This is the time. So thank you for joining us. Obviously, we support your show and urge people to check it out. And let's hope that RT does not get sanctioned and can continue to do the great work that they've been doing.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate it. And kick-ass, Buzzsaw's the best. Appreciate it coming on.
Of course. Thank you. Talk to you soon, Abby. Well, there you are, folks.
You're saying you like the current system? No, I probably dislike it as much as Michael Moore does. But he's complaining about it being part of capitalism. It has nothing to do with capitalism. This is corporatism. The corporations, I agree with him. Corporations run things. The drug companies lobby us. The insurance companies lobby us. And the hospital management companies lobby us. The AMA lobby us. And that's all managed care. And we have a system where money and bigness influences the government. But that's corporatism.
Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story or the person with the loudest voice or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.